Greenwood was the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked, where gossip traveled faster than the wind, and where everyone knew who owned what business. Life was simple, until one October night when simplicity was shattered by blood. The phone rang at Greenwood Police Department at exactly 11:42 p.m. Emergency dispatch, what's your... A male voice, frantic and trembling, cut through. It's Mr. Cole, Martin Cole. He's been attacked. He's not breathing. God, there's so much blood. Within minutes, the quiet residential street outside Martin Cole's mansion was ablaze with red and blue lights. Officers rushed past stunned neighbors who had gathered in nightgowns and pajamas. Their whispers carried on the autumn air. Inside, chaos reigned. The once pristine marble floor was smeared crimson. Security personnel, supposedly unshakable, looked bewildered, almost paralyzed. One of Martin's guards had been knocked unconscious, another injured. And there in his study lay Martin Cole, the powerful businessman whose empire spanned across Greenwood. His throat had been slashed with clinical precision. His eyes were wide open, frozen in a look of disbelief, as though his final moment had been one of shock rather than fear. Detective Sarah Langford, a veteran with 20 years in homicide, stood over the body and whispered to herself, "This doesn't make sense. How does someone breach this level of security?" Because Martin Cole wasn't just another businessman. His estate had been nicknamed the Fortress. Equipped with multiple guards, high-end surveillance, and state-of-the-art alarms, it was considered impenetrable. And yet someone had walked in, murdered him, and walked out, leaving almost no trace. By dawn, Greenwood awoke to a nightmare. Radios buzzed, newspapers rushed headlines, and the town's heartbeat shifted. The murder wasn't just a crime, it was the collapse of a sense of safety. And somewhere in the shadows of grief and suspicion, a secret was waiting to be unearthed. To understand Martin Cole's death, detectives first turned to the one man whose name always came up in the same breath as his, Richard Hale. Where Martin owned supermarkets, Richard owned real estate. Where Martin thrived on community presence, Richard thrived on influence and contracts. The two men had once been cordial, even friendly. But as their businesses expanded, their interests collided, and Greenwood became too small for their ambitions. It was whispered that Martin had once outbid Richard on a prime piece of land near the highway. Richard never forgave him. Later, Richard had allegedly blocked Martin's attempt to purchase a failing chain of stores by pulling strings with city officials. Their rivalry grew, public and bitter. At town council meetings, they'd sit on opposite ends of the room, glaring. At charity events, their smiles were tight, rehearsed. Greenwood's gossip machine had a favorite phrase: "Where Martin is, Richard won't be far, and trouble follows." So when Martin was murdered, Richard Hale's name rose naturally to everyone's lips. Detective Langford admitted as much during a press briefing. "We are not ruling anyone out. Given the history between the victim and Mr. Hale, he remains of significant interest." Richard, of course, denied everything. In a televised statement, he stood in front of reporters, face stern, voice measured. "I may have competed with Martin, but I had no reason to want him dead. This is a tragedy for Greenwood, and I will fully cooperate with the investigation." But suspicion lingered. To many, competition in business was motive enough. What no one yet realized, however, was that Martin's real killer wasn't across the street, but across the bed. Martin Cole wasn't just another businessman. He was Greenwood's golden boy. Born into a modest family, he had built his supermarket chain from a single corner store. Neighbors remembered him as the boy who stacked shelves after school, the young man who worked 2 jobs to pay for college. His rise to wealth was a story Greenwood held with pride. By his mid-40s, Martin owned 4 supermarkets, several warehouses, and a fleet of delivery trucks. He was generous too, funding the renovation of the town library, sponsoring local football teams, donating to churches. To many, he wasn't just rich, he was the very definition of success. And yet, behind closed doors, there was unease. Those closest to him knew Martin could be cold, calculating, and intolerant of betrayal. He trusted few people, preferring to rely on systems and protocols rather than loyalty. His home security system reflected that. Guards rotated on strict schedules. Cameras monitored every corner. Alarms were tested weekly. But what truly gnawed at him was his private life. His marriage to Elena, though glamorous on the outside, had begun to fracture. "She's not happy," one of Martin's friends once confided, "and neither is he. They put on a good show, but there's something off." The off would soon reveal itself in the ugliest of ways. The murder investigation began with predictable intensity. Detectives interrogated staff, security guards, and business associates. Richard Hale's name came up repeatedly. Detective Langford sat across from him during questioning. "You and Martin weren't on good terms," she pressed. Richard leaned back, lips tight. "Detective, I argued with Martin more than once. That's no secret. But would I risk everything I built to kill him? I had nothing to gain from his death." But some disagreed. Rivalry meant contracts, influence, power. If Martin was out of the way, Richard could expand freely. Motive, at least on paper, existed. For weeks, suspicion consumed Richard. He was followed by cameras, hounded by journalists, whispered about in cafes. His children were bullied at school. His business partners grew uneasy. Greenwood painted him as the villain. And yet, no evidence tied him to the crime. No suspicious bank transfers, no calls to hired hands, no DNA. By the 6th month, investigators hit a wall. Then a small clue surfaced, so subtle it almost slipped away. Forensic experts noticed a missing 10-minute window in Martin's home surveillance system the night he died. Someone had disabled it, and not in a brute force way. It was done cleanly, with intimate knowledge of the system. The realization chilled Langford. This wasn't an outsider forcing their way in. Someone with access opened the door. Elena Cole was stunning, poised, graceful, and endlessly charming. In Greenwood, she was admired. Women complimented her sense of style. Men envied Martin for marrying her. But beneath the socialite veneer, cracks formed. Elena had married Martin 8 years earlier, arriving in Greenwood from a distant city with a past no one fully knew. She was elegant, well-spoken, and quickly assimilated into the wealthy circle of the town. But gossip brewed. Why had Martin, a cautious man, fallen for someone so quickly? Why did Elena avoid talking about her family? Behind closed doors, their marriage was strained. Martin confided to his lawyer that he was considering divorce. The reason? Elena's inability to bear children weighed heavily in a town where legacy and family lineage mattered. But there was more. Martin had begun to quietly investigate her past. Detectives later uncovered notes scribbled in his diary. She lies about her family. Financial irregularities. Who is she really? Divorce may be the only way. Unknown to Martin, Elena already sensed his growing distance. And she wasn't the type to let go easily. Not of a marriage, and certainly not of the wealth tied to it. Her mask was cracking, but she wasn't finished acting. The case dragged on. 2 years passed with Greenwood restless. The community wanted closure, but detectives had little more than fragments. No murder weapon, no direct witness. Detective Langford refused to let go. She began digging not just into Martin's business rivalries, but into his marriage. The deeper she went, the darker it grew. Elena's spending habits drew suspicion. Lavish purchases made no sense compared to her personal accounts. Forensic accountants traced odd money flows. Funds Martin hadn't authorized, redirected into shell accounts. Then came the break. A financial trail linked Elena to known associates in a major city. Men flagged in previous investigations for organized crime. Langford's voice shook when she briefed her team. She's not just a grieving widow. She's connected to a syndicate. The syndicate, investigators learned, specialized in fraud, extortion, and contract killings. Elena wasn't a bystander. She was part of it, and the truth was devastating. Martin Cole hadn't just been murdered by chance. His death had been plotted by the very woman he had shared his life with. Evidence mounted quickly. Elena had compromised Martin's security system, feeding details of guard schedules, alarm codes, even which rooms were left unmonitored. She had played the long game, pretending to be the loyal wife while secretly conspiring against him. Detectives pieced together conversations, coded messages, and financial transfers linking her to syndicate operatives. One chilling discovery came from her intercepted email. "He's planning divorce. I'll lose everything. We must act now." Martin's death wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated, executed with surgical precision by Elena's criminal associates. And she had opened the door. When Langford finally arrested Elena, the town was stunned. Greenwood's darling socialite was paraded in handcuffs before cameras. The betrayal cut deep, not only for Martin's family, but for a community that had idolized her. The trial was one of the most high-profile in Greenwood's history. Courtrooms were packed. Prosecutors painted Elena as manipulative, cold, and greedy. Defense lawyers tried to argue she was coerced by dangerous men, but the evidence was damning. Surveillance logs, financial records, and witness testimonies tied her to the syndicate and the murder plot. Elena sat in silence as the jury pronounced the verdict. Guilty, she was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, alongside her associates. The syndicate's operations were further exposed, leading to multiple arrests across the city. But the damage lingered. Greenwood was scarred. Richard Hale, though cleared of suspicion, never recovered his reputation fully. The Cole family mourned a son, a brother, a leader. And the chilling truth remained. Martin Cole had invested millions in security, but the greatest danger had lain in the one person closest to him. Years later, Greenwood still speaks of Martin Cole's murder, not just as a crime, but as a lesson. That sometimes the most dangerous rival isn't the competitor across the street, but the person who shares your home, your trust, and your secrets.